Okay, well, firstly, I just want to say a big thank you to the conference organisers, Early Childhood Voices 2020. It's an absolute privilege to be invited. And I want to speak directly to the theme of the conference, voices. And my aim in this paper is to unsettle the idea that voices are exclusively human, and to turn attention to the stories that matter might have to tell us if only we're prepared to listen, and to tune in, to attune to the voices that matter has. And to do this through practices of what Anna Zing and Haraway term the art of noticing. So my suggestion, my provocation, is that maybe we need to approach childhood studies in a different way, as worldly, connected, confederate, and that as part of that project, storytelling and sticky knots and speculative middles, not knowing, is crucial to that particular endeavour. So the paper that I'm sharing with you today is based upon a forthcoming publication that I have co-authored with my PhD, one of my PhD students, Sid Mohandas. And the paper is very much about worldly connections and this commitment to decentering the human to contemplate childhoods as they materialise through everyday encounters with learning materials in a nursery classroom in London in the UK. And what we do in this paper is to trouble prevailing philosophies, pedagogies and worldviews that frame practice and circulate within the nursery classroom to arrive at other possible ways to think about childhood and to learn with and from them and the spaces in which they explore. So this mode of researching then sees us, the researcher, as entangled and immersed. It is inherently so it's about decentering the human. And the theoretical framework underpinning our work is, broadly speaking, feminist new materialism. And what this framework insists is that we must understand ourselves as entangled and immersed. We're not separate from that which we research. We can't step back and have some sort of bird's eye view on the world down there. We're actually entangled and implicated. But crucially, I guess, because it's a feminist project, then there is this underpinning commitment to social justice and making some tangible difference to the world, whether that be the way we think about things and or the way that we do things. So it's intentionally provocative and agitates another way to do things. And what it is also committed to is bringing together critique, a dismantling, a disrupting, and then creativity, thinking, where do we go from here? How else might the world be? And this approach necessarily embraces uncertainty. As I've mentioned, it's speculative. And this not knowing means that we're more open to viewing the world and engaging with the world in different ways. And this allows us for new knowledge to be generated differently. And it responds to Haraway's claims that there is an urgent need to tell other stories. The ones we're telling ourselves don't work. And this sort of work is ultimately response-able. It's our ability to respond in each tiny moment to make an ethical decision, and it's a situated practice. So this work is inspired by Donna Haraway, and particularly her earlier work from the late 1990s, where she stresses the need to rely upon situated knowledges and partial perspectives to activate a way of being in the world. So that's what we're endeavouring to do in the paper and what I'm endeavouring to do in this presentation today. So it's by taking matters seriously that we agitate a curious set of questions about the non-innocence of childhood to consider the ways in which gender manifests in unanticipated ways in early childhood contexts and beyond. And it is an enactment of Haraway's Cat's Cradle. So through this game of Cat's Cradle, of patterns and knots and getting stuck and teasing out, staying with the trouble as she talks about it, then we're pursuing tentacular lines of inquiry as a means to open out understandings of childhood that view it as interwoven through endless worldly connections to non-innocent matters such as heteronormativity, capitalist manufacturing, industrial farming, and meat eating, all of which I'll go on to unpack as this presentation unfolds. So how do we do this? We take a long-established and seemingly unremarkable object found in most early childhood settings as a means to undertake this investigation, notably the farm animal figurine. And this figurine provides us with a means to open out lines of inquiry to ask difficult questions about childhoods lived in the Anthropocene. As curriculum demands and inspection regimes impose increasing structure on early childhood settings, we're interested to explore what creating space and opportunity for what else thinking might make possible. When we encounter an object, we can ask what else gets produced through, within, and from early childhood materialities. We appraise some dominant pedagogical practices and excavate the histories, politics, technologies, and problematics surrounding the materials typically found in early childhood spaces. And we do this in order to unsettle normative ideas that shape contemporary childhood. So extensive existing research, mostly from developmental psychology and behaviour studies, tell us that animal figurines and fantasy play in early childhood are beneficial. However, there are various reservations about just how free play is and how open-ended and exploratory engagements with animal figurines really are. We find that as curriculum frameworks become increasingly structured and the drive to regulate the developmental child becomes more pressing, it's important to question the extent to which fantasy play with the figurines unfolds in neoliberal classrooms. We are concerned to explore what undirected engagements with the animal figurines might produce if children too are left to ask what else. So our principal concern is to take the study of animal figurines in feminist new materialist directions, to ask a different set of questions about what they make possible, the stories that they tell, and where they might lead our concerns with global and globalised childhood in the Anthropocene. From a fieldwork moment that captures children's entanglements with animal figurines, we follow lines of inquiry to contemplate what else gets produced. We consider our approach to childhood studies to be aligned with Haraway's mode of worldly inquiry, which is more than ethnographic and focused on the child in situ. This observation that was taken, captured by Sid about the trotting farm animals and the way in which they're herded into an enclosure, the role of the pipe cleaner, and the normative families is actually fairly unremarkable and seemingly insignificant and quite routine, something you might see every day in a Montessori classroom. Yet this observation set off all manner of questions for us about the stories that the animal figurines make possible and those that get shut down. It is clear that certain pedagogical intentions have been absorbed into the play, yet it is what's silenced and missing that troubles us most. So we arrive at sticky knot number 1. Animal families and Montessori pedagogy is our first sticky knot in this game of cat's cradle. In a Montessori setting, animal figurines have 2 specific learning goals. Firstly, to introduce vocabulary, and secondly, to spotlight relations. The animal family figurines are intended to reflect the child's own family relationship. The teaching activity involves a selection of families, for example, pigs, cows, sheep, horses. Each family has an adult male, an adult female, and a sexless animal child. The human child is invited by the Montessori teacher to group the animals into families, which is followed by the introduction of the names of each family member: bull, cow, calf, etc. The child is introduced to ideas about normative family formations and the natural world. So we see that there are very specific pedagogical intentions underpinning the animal family figurines in Montessori classrooms. Hidden within this, though, are deeply troubling adult impositions that present heteronormativity to the child as in some sense natural. Beyond these pedagogical intentions, we are concerned with what other stories are embedded in the production of these objects. We work with feminist new materialism to open out and extend ideas about families. What and who are we connected to and indebted to, entangled with and relationally co-producing? Taking this approach to the animal figurines in Montessori context takes us to the Western Christian thought, which has long used what is found in nature and what is deemed natural against LGBTQI+ communities. We argue that how gender and sexuality among animal families is conceptualized has serious implications for global childhoods. Thinking with Alamo's work on queer animals not only accounts for the deliberate erasure of queerness in nature, but it exposes fabricated and simplistic tales of human supremacy, biological reductionism, and genetic determinism that are woven into the materialities of these animal family figurines. The heteronormative family, the sexless animal child, aligns with dominant discourses that render sexuality irrelevant in early childhood while simultaneously promoting heteronormativity, which has been argued by Kerry Robertson amongst others. Embedded within the animal child figurines are assumptions and constructions of childhood as in some sense innocent and as a time of life requiring protection from corrupt and perverse forces in the world. The animal figurine families are imbued with and convey dominant constructions of the Western conjugal family, monogamy and whiteness. It is interesting to note that the farm animal families chosen for Montessori classrooms across the globe remain universally the same, irrespective of geographical location. The Western farm animals, pig, cow, sheep, goat, chicken, etc., are all likely to be found in a Montessori nursery in Mumbai as they are in London. This signifies the privileging of Western knowledge within Montessori practice and reinscribes the white saviour narrative that has been associated with European early childhood philosophers such as Montessori. Troubling the gendered politics of the animal figurines begins to reveal the non-innocence of materiality in the Montessori classroom, despite claims to neutrality and proximity to nature. Other stories and accounts of queer kin and what constitutes family become available, and perhaps with the freedom to play in more fantastical ways and to ask curious questions, children might enjoy contemplating other possibilities than those prescribed by heteronormativity. Our appraisal of the animal figurine families underlines the inseparability of nature and culture, as noted by Haraway in 2008. Queer kin relationalities are about how to imagine and embody generative relationships of irreducible difference, about thinking and doing kin, less in terms of blood and the Oedipal familiar, and more in terms of perceived and partial affinity across significant otherness. She urges that knowledge, living projects and histories can be rethought and rewritten within the context of these relationships of difference. By doing science differently as partial, shared, democratic and contingent, we can break free from nature-culture binaries and recognise everything as ultimately interwoven and inseparable as one word, nature-culture. So our next sticky knot. In our attempts to become with animal figurines, we attend to the non-innocent manufacture and distribution of these figures. Researching with Schleich toy manufacture generates a seriously sticky knot with which we attempt to grapple. The company was founded by Friedrich Schleich in 1935 and remains a world-leading toy manufacturer. It is based in Herlikofen, Germany. The company was most notable for its launch of the Blue Smurf figurines in the 1960s. However, it was from the 1980s that animal figurines became the company's core business, with lucrative markets in Germany, North America, United Kingdom, and France. The figurines have gone through 85 years of increasing commodification, with 30 million figurines sold annually in over 60 countries and 40,000 retail outlets. The company claims, with our products, children learn what animals really look like while playing. They learn about the animals' natural habitats and how they interact with each other. This conveys to them the basics about responsible cohabitation between humans and animals. A tangled mess starts to emerge. The Schleich animal families are a global phenomenon, produced through and made possible by complex capitalist networks. The animal figurines begin life as injection moulded plastic figures in Germany, which are then packaged and shipped to China, Tunisia, and Portugal. They are then hand painted and then shipped back to Germany for packaging and distribution around the world. The carbon footprint these animal figurines leave is immense. The non-innocence of these natural, neutral, apolitical learning materials becomes more troubling when the conditions at the overseas factories become apparent. China Labour Watch found Schleich to source labour from factories with poor working and living conditions, excessive overtime, below minimum wages, overcrowded dormitories and unsanitary facilities. And yet, the company celebrates its partnership with the World Wildlife Fund. I quote, through this collaboration, Schleich would like to actively support the protection of endangered species. We have been supporting the WWF's work in Germany and Austria to protect biodiversity for the past 5 years, while we bring endangered species like elephants, rhinoceroses, lions into children's rooms, thereby cultivating enthusiasms for animals and nature. The WWF works to protect these animals through various projects the world over. So following Harrow 2008, we ask, who and what do we touch when we touch the farm animal figurine? The cold, plastic, palm-sized creatures provoke and agitate. Just beneath stories of ethical responsibility and commitments to wildlife preservation are other, contradictory, and altogether more sinister stories of carbon footprinting, mass production, commercialization, commodification, pollution, and worker exploitation. Schleich figures are lovingly designed using PVC as base material, along with a plasticizer to produce animal figurines unique in their trueness to nature. The plasticizer was found to have noxious effects on child bodies, and recent urine samples have shown that these plastics exceed safe levels, particularly amongst German children aged 3 to 5. So the uncertain health and environmental implications further complicate understandings of agency being something that only humans have. Here we witness Jayne Bennett's thing power of the non-human at work. Animal figurines are not inert passive matter, but are lively and set off flows and forces that complicate conceptualization of innocent childhoods. Our attempts at figuring with figurines presents endless ethical dilemmas. We arrive at sticky knot number 3. The farm animal figurines in the fieldwork observation are missing a farm. Animals such as cows, sheep, pigs and hens take on a sort of domesticated status in their plastic form, but once placed within the context of a farm, these animals become livestock with a price attached to their head and a vibrant global market within which they can be traded dead and alive. Again, we see the thin veil of innocence slipping away when difficult questions are posed about the politics that stem from these figurines. England has long been associated with green mountains and pleasant pastures. Such bucolic imagery underlines a romanticised relationship between landscape, nature, and innocence. It remains the case that over 70% of the UK is farmland, but the extent to which it can be regarded natural is questionable. Agriculture in England is intensively farmed and highly mechanised. Production is split between crops and livestock, with sheep and cows accounting for the majority. According to the National Farmers Union, agriculture contributed around £24 billion of revenue and around £8.5 billion to the UK economy. But it is precisely the result of decades of intensive farming, and with it, the use of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, soil fumigants, desiccants, and chemical fertilisers, that soils have been depleted, watercourses degraded, and nature has struggled to cope with the pace of change. Over 600 farmland species over the past 50 years have declined, some to the point of extinction. Other man-made catastrophes have blighted farming. Most notable was the outbreak of BSE in the 1990s in Britain, a neurodegenerative disease in cattle caused by an infection brought about by being fed meat and bone meal. In essence, mad cow disease was brought about by human farmers feeding their herbivore cattle infected meat-based products made from cooked leftovers of the slaughtering process, as well as carcasses of sick and injured animals, a macabre form of enforced cannibalism that resulted in the slaughter of 4.4 million cows. Ethically dubious practices associated with capitalist cattle farming continues to wreak havoc on a global scale. I quote from Greenpeace: "The Amazon fires are no accident. Close to 2.5 million hectares of land was burned in the Brazilian Amazon in 1 month. Fires were deliberately started by farmers and land grabbers, encouraged by President Bolsonaro's calls to open the Amazon to agriculture. From the dense rainforest to the rolling savannas, Brazil's natural ecosystems are being decimated to produce beef and soya. And McDonald's, KFC, and Burger King are sourcing vast amounts of these goods. Both Burger King and McDonald's buy Brazilian beef. All three companies serve chicken fed a diet of soya from Brazil." So we see yet another tangled mess emerging from the sticky knot. Continuing to pull at the threads reveals frayed strands that take us to other natural disasters the world over. Floods, hurricanes, storms, fires, extreme temperatures. Despite the protestations of climate change deniers, there is little doubt that we are living and dying in the Anthropocene. Countries around the globe are consistently exceeding their own records for heat and rainfall. Extreme weather is a reality and has been directly attributed to global warming. Human consumption of energy has never been greater and continues to increase due to ceaseless economic expansion of emerging market economies, population growth, and increasing use of energy-consuming devices. These dystopian, yet all too real stories trace to and from farming, and as outlined previously, toy manufacturing, including the animal figurines, are directly implicated. So again, we might ask, who and what do we touch when we hold a farm animal figurine? As well as learning about heteronormative family formations and relations, the animal figurines also hold the potential for us and young children to gain awareness about farming as a practice, as a capitalist industry, as a fundamental aspect of globalized childhoods and a central feature of life in the Anthropocene. Taking the farm animal figurine seriously generates other ways in which to encounter the world and our human place within it, and our responsibilities in world-making practices. Farming is an uncomfortable anthropocentric truth of the current epoch. It rests on human mastery, control, and increasingly abuse of land, crops, and animals, with devastating consequences from which nature dies and/or fights back. The fourth sticky knot. The farm figurines are used in early childhood practice as a means to educate children about where food originates, albeit with a pronounced focus upon byproducts as developmentally appropriate, i.e. eggs and milk, cheese. The realities of being carnivorous in childhood, though, are addressed more directly in other contexts. For example, Teresa Aslanian, in the Norwegian context, attend to animal husbandry and the real-life death slaughter of a cow that a group of rural preschoolers in Norway are exposed to as part of their early childhood educational experience. Such experiences, though, are typically deemed taboo and inappropriate for young children to encounter. The need to protect children from uncomfortable truths and so preserve childhood innocence are deeply entrenched, yet a complex and contradictory landscape emerges. For example, the British Nutrition Foundation advises that protein foods are essential for healthy growth and recommend that toddlers should regularly eat cooked mincemeat and fish fingers as part of a balanced diet. In response to the challenges generated by the Anthropocene, there has been a recent rise in vegetarianism and veganism, and with it a staggering growth in alternative farming industries such as soya, which is not without its own controversy. Behind beef, Soy is the second largest agricultural driver of deforestation worldwide, according to the World Wildlife Foundation. Without proper safeguards, the soybean industry is causing widespread deforestation and displacement of small farmers and indigenous peoples around the globe. A further debate exists about the suitability of vegetarian and vegan diets for very young children. There's a publication by the National Health Service England, Is It Okay to Bring Up Your Child as a Vegetarian, for example. This messy landscape exposes the myriad ethical dilemmas and moral imperatives that are presented by a life in the Anthropocene, endlessly unfolding and enfolding into and away from each other. Haraway writes about ways of being in the world. Her narratives are always grounded in details of lived reality or embodied material. At the same time, they invite us to think, to act, and to relate in hopeful ways that reach beyond but intersect with these current real local arrangements and practices towards new but not always real possibilities. She advocates for storytelling as technologies for altered worlds. She is not in search of neat stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. Rather, she invites us to immerse ourselves in what Springer and Truman term the speculative middle. By generating these uncomfortable narratives, stories that have unfurled from serious yet playful encounters with plastic animal figurines, we are forced to contemplate our infected and affected place in this world. Then we have to recognise our responsibilities to participate in world-making practices that can make some sort of difference, however minor. We can no longer accept the figurine as natural, apolitical and neutral, if we ever did. The stories it tells matter. To how we become with children through their explorations and experimentations is the art of noticing I was referring to at the beginning. For the purposes of this presentation, we arrive at our final sticky knot, although in a game of cat's cradle, there is no final sticky knot. It's an endless, implicated, entangled, messy game. However, our final sticky knot is farming practices in Kerala, India, which is where Sid grew up and still has family. Of course, in the spirit of the speculative middle, the sticky knots never really end. But as I'm coming to the end of my time, we will need to stop at sticky knot number 5. Again, I ask, who and what do we touch when we touch the farm animal figurine? When the figurine is considered in the context of Kerala, stories of colonisation, untouchability and violence are agitated. Farming practices and food consumption in Kerala have historically been entangled with oppressive systems of caste. However, prior to the Brahmin migration in the 3rd century BC, the area was made up of egalitarian communities with no organised hierarchical social systems, and women typically occupied prominent roles in society. Agriculture was the primary occupation at the time, so people lived on a diet of rice, fish, and red meat. The caste system was introduced by Brahmin men, who apparently received the hierarchical caste system through divine instruction. The caste system privileged these men, who eventually owned all the temples and most of the land. The grip on land ownership was maintained through firstborn male inheritance. Meantime, slave castes were bought and sold for the same price as cattle to work on rice paddy plantations, but were prohibited from consuming the produce themselves. The caste system had very elaborate instructions on touch and distance, which partly stemmed from the politics of beef eating. The lowest castes were considered untouchables because they were tainted as a result of consuming dead cows. The slaves had to remain 96 steps from the Brahmin, while the untouchables even further. The motivation for vegetarianism amongst the upper caste then had more to do with concerns for religious purity than care for animals or non-violence. Through various social and educational reforms, feminist resistances, as well as communist influence of the 1900s, Kerala made progress to challenge some caste-based structures and inequalities. However, there has been a recent resurgence of caste-based prejudice with the rise in Hindu nationalism and fundamentalism under Prime Minister Modi. Modi rolled out a comprehensive ban on cow slaughter and beef consumption in states where his party is in power. Related to this, Hindu nationalist groups have penalised beef eaters through sexual violence, flogging and lynching. Amidst this rise of caste-induced violence, beef eating has emerged as a political act of subversion and resistance in Kerala. In 2017, the central government in Kerala passed a bill to ban the sale and purchase of cattle from animal markets for slaughter. The bill was interpreted as an attempt to impose right-wing Hindu nationalist views and was met with resistance from activists across Kerala, many of whom are vegetarian, who organised beef fests in public spaces to protest against the bill. So whilst these stories about beef act as a challenge to caste-based oppression, they are also deeply problematic when considering the enormous scale of the meat industry in India. The sale of beef is worth $4.3 billion US, providing 23% of the world's beef export. The demand for Indian beef is particularly high because it comes from free-range buffaloes feeding on natural pastures. According to a recent international survey, Kerala topped the list on cattle slaughter with 1.17 million adult cattle and nearly 70,000 young cattle slaughtered in 1 year. The produce of the meat industry includes bones for processing into gelatine, osseous and decalcium phosphate, raw and wet blue hides for leather, and casings for intestines. So from Brahmin patriarchy evident in India's caste system to the masculinist politics of the meat industry, we're confronted with stories that materialise childhood in specific ways and not others when we take matters seriously. Through this game of cat's cradle, we have been forced to contemplate where else the cow figurine can take our ideas about childhood, by privileging our situated, local, partial and critical perspectives and pursuing lines of inquiry that the animal figurine makes possible. We have arrived at the complicated, multi-layered politics of meat eating. In the spirit of worldly inquiry, I have sought to offer you various interwoven, uncomfortable stories that insist that we must think deeply about that, which on first encounter appears benign and unremarkable. As you sit upon the floor in kindergarten, surrounded by all manner of objects purportedly there for child development, you might just want to ask yourself, what else? What and who do I touch when I touch this? As I have tried to illustrate, it's essential that we recognise that our situated knowledges and partial perspectives can enable childhoods to be encountered as interwoven and complexly global. Through practices of storytelling, I have ventured along lines of inquiry that presented a series of sticky knots that generated uncomfortable affects, and insisted that by taking material objects found in early childhood contexts seriously, other accounts of gender, childhood, and worldly connections become available. I would like to think that the pursuit of these worldly stories created a stutter, forced us to think deeply, and therefore requires us to consider our ethical responsibilities in each moment of each day. This mode of inquiry is an ongoing practice of making a difference, however small, in the world.